You learn the sound of a home. The light switch that hesitates. The step that whispers. The pump that hums like a steady old friend behind the cedar posts. The morning they cut my water, that hum was gone. I turned the tap and heard nothing but hollow air. In that thin, breathless silence, I knew two things. Someone had crossed my fence in the night, and they were sure I wouldn't do a thing about it. I was standing on my porch with my father's old mug warming my hands. The enamel's chipped on the lip, same as it's been for 20 years. And there's a tiny burn mark on the handle where he once set it down on a hot manifold in the barn. My flag the one he folded alone on the day we buried. Grandpa lifted in the valley breeze, soft as breathing. From this porch, you can see the whole bend of the valley. Cottonwoods along the wash, roofs beyond the fence line, and farther off. The bright teeth of a perfect neighborhood trying to stare down the land that came before it. Folks there call themselves Raven Ridge Stucco Dreams and Synchronized Sprinklers. I call it what it is, a grid that mistook neatness for neighborliness. This farmstead sits outside their covenants. It always has. The well that feeds it runs deep under the hill, a cold vein my grandfather tapped with a rented rig and stubborn hope. He used to say, "Water tells the truth about a place. If it's shared fairly, folks behave. If it's stolen, they don't." The letter started in spring. Unapproved structure visible from the road. The structure was my father's tool shed. Work vehicle in view. That would be the same dented pickup that hauled half. This valley out of snowdrifts every winter since I was tall enough to ride shotgun. Grass height exceeds standard.
Out here.
Grass survives on gratitude. I drove to their tidy office once. Just once. The carpet smelled like citrus cleaner and decisions made by people who've never put a shovel in the ground. Behind the glass counter sat a woman whose smile looked stapled in place. Sylvia Hargrove, board president, sharp manicure, sharper tone. She greeted me by last name and rule number. I told her, as calmly as I could, that my land wasn't in their kingdom. She tilted her head like she was examining a chipped coffee cup in a thrift store. "Your property is highly visible to our residents," she said. "Visibility confers impact. Impact confers responsibility," I said. "That's not how jurisdiction works." And I left before I said something my father would have regretted for me. For a while I tried ignoring the emails. I did my chores, patched fence, split cedar, tuned the pump. There's a rhythm to the place. Coffee at dawn, walk the fence by 8, check the pressure by 9. Sweep the porch because the valley never stops giving you dust. The pump house sits behind the old barn, a square of galvanized metal and stubborn bolts. When it runs, the whole ground hums, and you feel it in your boots like a slow heartbeat. That night, a Wednesday, I think I walked out there in the dark and laid my palm on the housing warm, alive, pressure at 43. Die. Flow steady. "We're fine," I told the machine, like a fool who still believed decency had boundaries. Because here's the thing. Raven Ridge had been drinking from this aquifer longer than most of them have lived here. My grandfather gave the old ranch families a connection when wells ran dry. Back then, there was a handshake and a promise. Folks kept both. The ranches sold, the houses arrived, and the promise turned into a story people forgot to tell. Someone laid down new pipe. Someone else buried it under fresh sod. And one day, the HOA started believing the water came with the HOA. The morning after the silence. I walked to the pump house with my father's mug and a bad feeling. The sun hadn't cleared the far ridge yet. The field held a thin, white haze, the kind that sits on grass when the night's been grieving. The gauge said 0. The galvanized line to the house looked wrong to clean, too bright like a scar dressed up for Sunday. The cut wasn't an accident. It was a decision. Above the valve, a laminated notice flapped against the housing with a strip of cheap tape. Unauthorized connection, disconnected per HOA maintenance protocol. I set the mug down on the dirt and felt the old barn tilt in my chest. The ground wore 2 deep sets of boot prints, turning circles where no one should have lingered. There were wrench bites on the coupling. Someone had brought tools, a plan, and nerve. I called the number on the last email. Sylvia answered like she'd been practicing for the moment. "Good morning, Mr. Whitfield. Honey to Hollow. You cut my water. We corrected an illegal tap to community infrastructure. The well is on my land. The pump is my equipment. The water is mine. The distribution network serves Raven Ridge. If you desire service, reconnection requires a $15,000 fee plus compliance with community standards." I closed my eyes and pictured my father tightening the pump bolts with his big hands. "I'll call the sheriff." "This is a civil matter," she said, and hung up. The deputy who came out was new to shaving and older than the badge on his chest. He took photos like someone told him to, apologized with his eyebrows, and said the words men with land hate to hear, probably civil. "Sir, so I did what the men before me did when the ground felt like it was slipping. I went to the oak table inside and opened the drawer that sticks. I pulled out file after file, paper that smelled like the year's permits, pump records, the flow charts I'd kept with dates and psi, scribbled in pencil. And then the one I needed. Water rights certificate. No. 2147 Thornhill Trust. Inclusive extraction. Recorded and renewed. My grandfather's careful signature sat there like a slat he'd nailed himself. I laid the papers side by side. Flow logs, usage estimates from the neighborhood's thirsty green, sensor notes I'd taken when the system hiccuped last summer. I ran numbers like my old foreman taught me, slow and exact. It wasn't just trespass. It was entitlement with paperwork tape. I called Meredith Lane, a water rights attorney down in the city. She has a voice like good steel. "Do you have the chain?" she asked. "Start to finish." "Then you're not in a dispute," she said. "You're building an injunction." By noon, Meredith filed for a temporary restraining order. I got an email, 13 minutes later, from the HOA account. Mediation could resolve this amicably. Amicable. That word is a sweater people throw over theft when guests drop by. I forwarded it to Meredith. She wrote back one line. No. Across the road, the community center lights blinked on early. A dozen cars. Then more. Then the line snaked around the lot. "Emergency meeting," their marquee said, like the weather was coming for the roof. I stayed on my porch and watched the lights glow like a fishbowl full of talk. The pump house behind me sat quiet and patient, a dog that doesn't bark because it knows you heard the first noise. I made notes in a pocketbook my father used to carry. I wrote Sylvia's name, and then the dates of every letter. The world calls it evidence. Out here, we call it remembering who tried to move your fence when you weren't looking. Meredith connected me with a reporter from the county paper, Elena Brooks, who still wears boots to interviews because dirt is where truth lives. She showed up in a truck that had seen more gravel than gossip pages. "This the heart of it?" she asked, pointing to the pump house. "The heart and the history," I said. She photographed the cut like a crime scene, gouged threads, wrench marks, laminated audacity. I brought out the certificate and flow logs. She read quietly, asking straight questions, no trick edges. "Why didn't you shut them off years ago?" "Because my grandfather believed neighbors are worth trusting." I wanted to believe it too. Her story ran online that night. HOA cuts water to man who owns the source. That headline looked like someone finally set the table right side up. By morning, they'd shared it in places I didn't know. Still read local news. The emails came like summer rains low, then sudden, then everywhere. Strangers who knew exactly what an HOA could become when the wrong person learned to use a clipboard like a sword. Some told me to cut Raven Ridge off entirely. Some told me to sue until the paint peeled off their meeting room. All I did was print the article and set it under the salt shaker on the porch table. The flag lifted above me and settled again. The hearing felt like waiting at the dentist while a man in a suit tells you whether your jaw belongs to you. Fluorescent lights, stale air, nervous coughs. Sylvia sat at the far table dressed like victory. She didn't look at me. Meredith spoke plain. That's her trick. No fireworks, just facts. She showed the chain of rights, the pump ownership, the cut, the photos, the numbers. She talked about extraction and conveyance like a carpenter talks about square and plumb. The HOA's lawyer said shared infrastructure 3 times and reasonable misunderstanding twice. The judge asked him once if he had proof of ownership. He did not. Assumptions aren't interests, the judge said, like she'd been saving that sentence for a morning exactly like this. Then she signed the order. Restore service within 24 hours. No entry without consent. No maintenance where you have no right to be. Outside, the sky went that dark metal color it gets before rain thinks about keeping a promise. 2 trucks waited by my gate when I got home. The men inside looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. One of them had the kind of forearms that come from turning other people's bolts. "Sir," he said, "we're here to reconnect per court order." "I didn't cut it," he added, voice low. "The kind of apology you offer when you need your job, but not the taste it leaves." "Do it right," I told him. "Leave it better than you found it." They did. They flushed the line, replaced the chewed threads, tightened the couplings until the metal sang. When they stepped back, I turned the switch. The first stutter of water through old iron is a sound that makes your bones unclench. The kitchen tap coughed, cleared, and then poured steady into the sink. I let it run and listened. Not because I needed the water right then, but because I needed the sound. If you've never heard justice, it sounds like water choosing motion again. The next morning, a white state truck rolled up, seal on the door that actually means something. Water resources? Division? The inspector moved the way men move when their paperwork and conscience are on the same side. He traced the lines, took photos, asked real questions. At the control box, he cross-checked permits on a tablet and whistled, soft. "They never filed extraction permits," he said, almost to himself. "And they've been distributing?" "Years," I said. He typed for a while in his mobile office. Printed 2 yellow notices that looked like parking tickets for arrogance, and handed me copies. Unauthorized extraction. Operating an unregistered distribution system. Fines, deadlines. I didn't grin, but my shoulders dropped a half-inch closer to where they belong. Word traveled fast. Raven Ridge held another meeting that night. I didn't go. I sat on the porch with the lights off and listened to the valley breathe. Coyotes barked somewhere north. The pump behind the barn ran quiet and sure. By the next afternoon, they voted. That's what I heard anyway. Confidence in the president gone. Resignation posted before the cookies cooled. The HOA site scrubbed her name like a stain. A message came through from a familiar address, Jonah Pierce. Their accountant, a man I'd nodded to in the hardware aisle 100 times without saying a word. "Mr. Whitfield, I know you don't owe us anything, but we need to talk about the water." I looked out toward the pump house. The flag above me hooked and unhooked from the breeze. "Now," I said to the air, "we can have a conversation." Jonah showed up without a tie. That mattered. He stood by the pump and studied it like a man considering a church pew for the first time in years. "I didn't know," he said. "Most didn't. We were wrong," swallowed. I was wrong. I didn't let him off the hook. "Your board cut my line. Your residents drank from my well, while your letters tried to shame my porch." He nodded, jaw tight. "I can't fix yesterday. I'd like to build a better tomorrow." He opened a folder, no logos, no gloss, just notes. "Agreement proposal. You retain ownership of well and system. We pay per 1,000 gallons at a fair indexed rate. HOA funds all distribution maintenance within our boundary. 0 entry onto your land. If we breach any term, you can terminate with 90 days notice." He held my gaze. "Put it in whatever language you want. I'll take it to the board." Behind him, the field moved in the breeze like it was agreeing with him, just once. I said, "Bring me numbers that respect the land and the hand that dug it. No discounts for attitude. No hidden clauses dressed as kindness. Straight terms or none at all. Straight terms." he said. Or none at all. We shook hands there beside the pump house that has outlasted 3 generations of good years and bad. For the first time since the cut, the knot between my shoulder blades loosened. That evening I brewed another pot in my father's old percolator. Steam rose in the kitchen window and fogged the glass just enough to make the yard look like memory. I sat under the flag till the stars arrived one by one. You'd think victory would shout. It doesn't. It sits down beside you and breathes the same air, and doesn't need to be reminded that it exists. I thought about my grandfather, the way he'd lean over a map with a carpenter pencil in his hand and say, "A man can share a fence without giving away his home." Somewhere past the fence line, Raven Ridge's sprinklers hissed to lifetimers, ticking toward a future I could live with. This time, the water moving under their yards carried a receipt attached. Not revenge. Not spite. Just fairness. I walked out to the pump house, touched the metal, felt the vibrations settle into my palm. 45 psi. Flow perfect. Night insects trilled along the wash. An owl questioned the dark from the cottonwoods. I whispered, "You're safe." Maybe I meant the land. Maybe I meant me. Back on the porch, I raised my father's mug. The flag answered with one slow flap. "We're not done yet," I told the quiet. "We're going to write this agreement so clean, it'll teach the next clipboard in line how to behave." Jonah's truck left a trail of dust curling behind the fence line. He'd driven away, with my handshake still echoing in his eyes. You can always tell when a man is carrying both guilt and hope. They sit on his shoulders differently. I stood there beside the pump, the hum steady under my palm, thinking, maybe the fight's changing shape, but it isn't over yet. 2 mornings later, he came back with papers. No lawyers, just sweat on his brow and coffee stains on the margins. He'd done the math himself. Freights, gallons, service costs. $2 per thousand, he said. Half the commercial rate. You keep ownership. We pay monthly. I read each line slowly, pencil in hand, adding my own notes in the margin. Termination clause. Right of inspection. No trespass under any circumstance. Jonah nodded to every point. "You've got leverage," he said. "I don't intend to fight it." "You don't," I said, "because you remember who dug the well." He looked down. "My grandfather helped your grandfather pour the first concrete base, you know?" I forgot that until last week. While we hashed out clauses, the outside world kept shouting. Elena's article had gone national. Talk shows, blogs, even real estate podcasts, so everyone had an opinion. Some called me the waterman of Raven County. Others said I'd set a precedent that would bankrupt HOAs everywhere. My inbox turned into a war zone of sympathy and skepticism. Across the road, Raven Ridge's board fractured. Half the members wanted peace. The other half wanted revenge dressed as policy. New fines popped up online, draft proposals that looked like thinly veiled punishments. For breathing too loud near their boundary, Jonah warned me. Some of them still think you manipulated the system. Well, I smiled without humor. They're just mad the system finally had rules they didn't write. A reporter from Phoenix drove up one afternoon. He wanted a televised interview camera crew. Lights. Everything. I declined. My father used to say, "If you're right, you don't need a spotlight to prove it." Instead, I wrote a short letter to the local press. This isn't about punishment. It's about remembering that fairness still belongs in small towns. By evening, that quote was trending more than Sylvia's name ever did. Neighbors from other counties started emailing Jonah asking for copies of our draft contract. He told me, half laughing, half nervous, they want to use it as a model. "Then let's make it worth copying," I said. Inside Raven Ridge, the cracks widened. Board meetings turned into shouting matches. One video leaked online, 2 members arguing over who approved the illegal cut. A woman shouted, "I told Sylvia it was trespass," while another hissed, "Don't say that on record." It played on the local news that night between weather and sports. Jonah showed up at my porch the next morning, eyes red. They're eating each other alive. Let them, I said. Maybe they'll finally taste the truth, he sighed. I keep thinking about what you said, that water keeps people honest. Maybe we just needed to remember who we were before bylaws replaced decency. 2 weeks later, the state fines became official. $75,000 for unauthorized extraction, another $25,000 for unregistered distribution. It hit their treasury like a hammer through glass. I watched from my porch as contractors rolled into their neat streets clipboard men from the state marking valves, taking samples, measuring flow. Kids watched from doorsteps while their parents whispered about taxes and dues. One woman walked across the road to my fence. "Sir," she said, voice trembling, "are you shutting us off?" I shook my head. "No, ma'am. Just making sure the next glass of water you pour is earned, not stolen." She nodded and whispered, "Thank you," before walking back under a sky that suddenly looked honest again. Jonah brought the final draft a few days later. We sat at the cedar porch table, same one my father built, same knots in the wood, same coffee rings from decades of mornings. He laid the paper flat. 30 years renewable. We'll handle maintenance, billing, and monitoring. All data shared openly. You retain extraction rights. He'd even added a clause I hadn't asked for, acknowledgement of historical ownership. Whitfield. Well, number 1, 1972. I read it twice. "You added that?" he nodded. Figured history deserved a signature, too. We both signed in silence, pen scratching slow like a confession being writ. The click sounded heavier than the judge's gavel. The following week, HOA mailboxes filled with a new letter. We acknowledge our prior actions were improper. We have reached a lawful and respectful agreement with Mr. Whitfield. All future operations will honor his ownership. Some neighbors left pies on my fence post. Others just nodded when they passed, too proud to say sorry. Too human not to. The lawns turned greener, not from guilt, but from clean water finally paid for. Jonah started hosting open meetings. Kids played near the community park again. They even changed their motto sign at the gate. The old one said, "Perfection through policy." The new one read, "Respect through neighborhood." One evening, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a short handwritten note. I moved north. They asked me to step down before the vote. I told myself I was protecting values, but truth is I was protecting control. I hope you never have to learn that lesson the hard way. Shh. Set it on the table beside the mug and stared at the handwriting until the ink blurred. For a long time, I thought revenge would feel like that an apology mailed too late. It didn't. It just felt quiet. By midsummer, the valley finally found its rhythm again. The state inspectors closed their case, fines paid, systems certified. The pump's hum had turned softer, almost content. Every morning I checked the gauge's 45 psi, flow perfect hand every time I did. I felt something loosen in my chest. Neighbors started planting vegetable beds again. One family even built a small chicken coop behind their yard, feathers flashing gold in the sun. Nobody complained. Nobody filed a report. Funny how, once you remind people what fairness costs, they guard it better than any rule book ever could. Sometimes at night, I still sit out back and watch the lights of Raven Ridge blink across the wash. They look different now, not like judgment, but like belonging. Jonah joined me once, a thermos in hand. He said, "Do you ever wish it hadn't come to this?" I thought about my father's words, about that first morning without water, about the silence that started everything. "No," I said. "Some lessons need drought before they sink in." He nodded. "You turned a feud into a framework. People in 3 counties are already copying this agreement." I smiled. "Good. Maybe the next man with a porch like mine won't have to fight as hard just to keep what's his." Later that night, I walked back to the pump. The metal glowed faint silver under the moon. I placed my hand on the housing and felt that familiar vibration travel up my arm, steady, honest, alive. From across the valley, sprinklers whispered in rhythm, For the first time, their sound didn't bother me. They were no longer stealing. They were paying their dues, same as the rest of us. I turned toward the porch, flag moving slow against the stars. For the first time since all this began, the valley felt whole again, patched. Not perfect, but breathing right. I took a sip from my father's mug and said softly, "Justice doesn't come fast, but when it arrives, it stays a while." Then I looked out toward the horizon, where the first hint of dawn brushed the ridgeline. Because sometimes peace isn't an ending, it's just the quiet chapter before something new begins. Some endings don't sound like trumpets. They sound like steady hums and coffee poured slow. The valley had gone quiet after months of noise. Letters stopped. Meetings ended. And for the first time in a year, I could hear nothing but the water running where it belonged. That's when I realized the fight was never about winning. It was about teaching a place to breathe right again. Morning sun broke over Raven Ridge like nothing had ever happened. Sprinklers hissed on schedule. Children laughed on driveways that used to hold arguments. But beneath it all was something different. Quiet respect. Jonah and I walked the line between our lands that day, checking the meters and valves. Every number matched, every pressure steady. He looked over at me. "Strange how peace feels heavier than war at first," he said. I smiled. "Because you have to carry it without adrenaline." The agreement had been in place for 6 months. Payments on time, maintenance on schedule, and not a single violation letter in my mailbox. For the first time in a decade, I didn't wake up expecting a fight. Raven Ridge had changed in ways no bylaw could have predicted. The new board focused on what mattered: roads, lighting, kids, safety, not fence colors or truck sizes. Jonah opened every meeting to the public and published financials online. When I walked into their town hall one evening, the room fell silent for half a second, then someone started clapping. It was awkward and sincere at once. "Mr. Whitfield," one woman said, "we owe you a thank you for reminding us what community means." I nodded and replied, "I just wanted my water back." They laughed, but we all knew it was bigger than that. It was a Sunday when the past knocked on my door. Mrs. Evelyn Carter, 84, and still wearing the same sun hat from the old ranch days, stood there holding a pie. "I heard you settled things," she said, eyes bright. "I knew your grandfather. He used to haul water for us before anyone had pipes." We sat on the porch, sharing pecan pie and stories that smelled of dust and loyalty. She pointed toward the pump house in the distance. That sound kept this valley alive. People forgot who built it. I watched the flag above it flutter in agreement. "Some things," I said, "don't need remembering. They just need respect." A month later, Jonah called with unexpected news. "The State Review Board read our agreement," he said. "They want to use it as a template for other counties." I laughed softly. "I didn't mean to start a movement." "You didn't?" he said. "You just reminded people what right looks like on paper." Then he hesitated. "There's one more thing. Alina Brooks won an award for her story about you." I felt my throat tighten. "She earned it," I said. "She also wants a follow-up piece. Something about forgiveness." I looked at the flag, then at the valley bathed in sunlight. "Tell her I'm working on it." When autumn came, I took a walk past the old fence line. The cottonwoods had gone amber. The air smelled of dirt and change. Beyond the ridge, Raven Ridge looked smaller, still neat, still bright, but no longer looming. Funny how a boundary feels different when it's mutual. I stopped by the barn and ran my hand over the carved initials my father left in the doorbeam. The wood had darkened over the years, but his letters were still clear. R.W. 1978. He used to say, "You don't really own land. You just promised to treat it better than you found it." I think I finally understood what he meant. One evening, Jonah forwarded me a news clipping. Another town, another HOA president named Sylvia Hargrove, same one, resigned again after a dispute over excessive rules. No trespassing this time, just too many letters, too many people fed up with control. I stared at her photo for a long time. She looked smaller now, like a person shrinking under the weight of her own need to command. I didn't feel hate, only a quiet kind of pity. Some people can't breathe without a rule book. Take it away, and they don't know how to exhale. By winter, peace had settled so deep, it almost felt like music. Every night I made coffee in the old percolator, sat under the flag, and listened to the pump hum through the cold. Sometimes Jonah joined me. Sometimes I sat alone. Either way, the silence wasn't lonely anymore. One night I caught my reflection in the window and barely recognized the man looking back, less anger, more depth, like the land itself had rubbed off on me. My father's mug sat beside me, the steam rising slow. The flag moved once in the breeze, as if agreeing that some wars are worth the quiet after. A young couple moved next door to the edge of my property. First-time homeowners, bright-eyed and unsure. They came over with a basket of bread and a list of questions about water access, property lines, and old stories they'd heard. We stood by the fence, and I told them the whole thing, truth and all. When I finished, the young man said, "So? You still trust them after all that?" I looked at the flag and then at the pump. I don't trust people to be perfect. I trust them to learn. The young woman smiled. "That's enough, isn't it?" "More than enough," I said. "The thing about water is, it doesn't hold grudges. You block it. It waits. You cut it, it finds another path. You respect it, and it feeds you. People aren't that different. We all want to flow, to be seen without being controlled, to share without being us justice, and water move the same way, slow, steady, and always toward level ground." I looked around the porch, the flag, the cedar posts, the barn light flickering faint in the distance, and felt the weight of peace finally settle in the boards beneath me. For the first time in years, I didn't need to defend anything. I just had to keep it running right. One evening in early spring, rain rolled in across the ridge, soft, steady, kind. It ran down the roof, across the gutters, and into the earth my family had trusted for generations. I stood barefoot on the porch, rain speckling my shirt, and let the sound fill the silence that used to hold anger. Maybe that's what forgiveness really is. The moment you stop needing the world to apologize, start building it better instead. The pump rumbled on behind me, steady as truth itself. I took one last sip from the mug and whispered, "You did good. Dad, we're still keeping it honest. If you've ever dealt with an HOA that forgot what neighbor means, remember this. Rules don't build community. Respect does. And respect, like water, only flows both ways.